Wait a minute. Hold on a second, folks, because OBS decided to scuff me. There we go. And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the monastery, the open bar of the internet, the world's greatest shit show, and the place where we, the good brothers and sisters of this most holy of temples, seek enlightenment through the drunkest, craziest, and most batshit ways possible. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me, I have a newcomer into the temple, coming to us at long last after a whole lot of ships passing in the night between us. The man behind Star Anvil Studios, responsible for things like Starbreakers, Saints, and Sinners, the Knights Arcanum, and now with the Secret World universe. First starting with Secret World for both 5e and Savage Worlds, and now expanding with the currently crowdfunding North America expansion. The one and only Brandon Verhalen. I'm hoping I got that right.
It seems like a lot of build-up for just saying hi, guys. But yes, you got it all right.
Yeah, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing great.
Glad to finally have you here, because for a bit of deep lore for everybody watching, we had been trying to do this for a few months. Like we had everything set up and ready to go. I think around the time Starbreaker was crowdfunding, and
Probably.
then we had to reschedule.
Yeah.
We had tried it before that with the Secret World, and then things happened.
Crazy how the world doesn't always cooperate.
Mm-hmm. Fortunately, it didn't happen enough times to make me consider that you and I were cursed, but it came close. So, getting past that, one of the traditions around here is opening with the humble beginnings, in a sense. So, I'd like you to walk me through your first introduction to role-playing games and what made it stick.
Way back in the old days when video games were played in arcades and not at home, the guy who ran the arcade was a friend of mine. We used to game a lot, play video games there. They'd close the doors and he'd put quarters in the machines and we'd keep playing after the mall closed.
Mm-hmm.
And he invited me over to play Dungeons and Dragons back. This is early, not like 91. So just after the Satanic Panic was still around.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a bit of like, oh, that's an evil game. I was like, I've heard some crazy things. I said, no, it's just a game. We have fun. So I was like, okay, let's play. He says, what do you like from fantasy? I was like, I like King Arthur. He said, good, you're a paladin. And that was my first character. That was what he thought was fit. And I enjoyed it thoroughly. I mean, it was great. And just the GM we had was amazing, and that they'd already built this world. He'd already drawn a map on parchment paper, crumpled it, coffee stained it, burned the edges, had the serpent going in and out of the map. Just fantastic world. He had like an entire notebook of graph paper with this detail of a castle we went through. It was very much dungeon crawling D&D back then, but we played a campaign for well over 2 years, every Saturday and Sunday, just about for 8 to 12 hours a day, because I was 18 and had nothing else to do. So yeah, it was fun and I enjoyed it, and kind of stuck with it ever since.
Yeah, since you mentioned arcades, I'm wondering if you had played any arcade game long enough to get the kill screen.
If there was any game I would have gotten close to, it would have been Galaga. I mean, I could play for every lunch break on a quarter. I could play for a half hour on a quarter. That was my entertainment when I worked in the mall back in the day.
I think you're familiar with the concept of a kill screen. You know, when the game is trying to reach for a level that doesn't exist.
Yeah, I never did that, but that would have been a game I could have tried for it on.
Yeah, I did it once, but the main thing I remember from the arcade I was growing up with, and this was a Mandela effect for me for years, was the existence of Baby Pac-Man. Which is still one of the weirdest kind of arcade setups I've ever seen. Because somebody at Midway got the idea of, hey, this Pac-Man thing's doing well, and we do well with pinball machines, let's combine the two. It went down as well as you think.
Yeah, I played a decent amount of Pac-Man, but wasn't my favorite game. Galaga, Altered Beast. There was a racing game. I can't remember what it was called. It was a stunt driving game that we used to try that would put a lot of money into too.
Probably
And Spy Hunter.
Yeah. As far as a racing game, around that time, probably Pole Position.
No. This one you would go on ramps and loops and
probably Stun Runner.
Maybe. I'd have to look. I'm a little bit older now.
And if we're talking early '90s, just getting the foot in the door when it comes to the idea of 3D in games, it was probably Stun Runner.
Could very well be. I don't remember the name anymore. If I see a picture of it, I'll remember. Anyway.
Yeah. But now since a lot of the material you do for Star Anvil is using Savage Worlds, what was your first introduction to Savage Worlds? Was it through the core or was it through one of the setting books?
So prior to being called Savage Worlds, I'd played Deadlands. And for a period of time, I kind of left gaming, and when I came back, it was Deadlands again, Savage Worlds, because I didn't know they had made a generic version and changed the rules a bit, but it's like, this seems weird. I remember it being called Deadlands. Why is it called Savage Worlds? It took me a while to realize it was now a core book similar to the D&D book, the way it worked, and then I was like, oh, okay. And I just, went back to playing Deadlands again, basically, for a period of time, because that's what I remembered, and yeah, that's pretty much what brought me back.
Yeah.
Specifically Deadlands, the Weird West, because they hadn't done any other parts of it yet.
Yeah, it wouldn't be a few years before the Weird West would get. I won't say it was until a few years. It was a bit of time because, the Weird West was basically taking Deadlands and going Mad Max with it. I suppose it's a better introduction than mine was, which I had played Deadlands and then I stopped for a while, and then I come across the Savage World of Solomon Kane.
That's one I know of, and I know basically what it's about, but I've never actually read it or played it, so I didn't grab my attention, but it sounds like it's a really cool setup for those that like it.
Yeah, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's Solomon Kane and Savage Worlds. And I know when it comes to Robert E. Howard stuff, Conan is the one that gets all the attention, but I have a fondness for Solomon Kane. And I've had to get into arguments with some about why I consider him a good representation of a certain type of paladin. Or at the very least, more of the Avenger archetype of paladin. As opposed to basically that there's multiple ways to do these kind of archetypes instead of just the one. Not every barbarian has to be an XP of Conan, if you follow me.
Yeah, sure.
But with that in mind, it is interesting that after all this time, Funcom would push for a tabletop secret world, or just tabletop anything with what they do. How did that particular partnership come about? Was it you guys reaching out to Funcom, or was it the other way?
It was definitely me reaching out. Funcom, I won't say was looking to do an RPG. I had been working on my different RPGs, and I know that a way to get your foot in the door, get noticed, is to do an IP that already has a built-in audience. I mean, the short version of licensing is you're buying an audience. You pay them a certain amount, and you have this automatic audience in place. And that would get more people to see what I have and possibly make some money at the same time. It's all good if you can get it done. So I just sent an email and asked, and they said yes. I mean, the longer version is it took a while to get the contract done and get it taken care of. It took even longer for me to put the team together once they said yes, but they did say yes, and they've been nothing but helpful and great, the different guys that I've had to talk to there. But it was basically, I just asked, they said, oh, that sounds neat. Send us an email and we'll see what, they kicked it around. They said, sure. It wasn't really that hard to get the yes. It just took longer to get the contract done.
Yeah, and paperwork always takes longer. Welcome to bureaucracy and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, and largely the main thing was them protecting their IP, as always. Anytime they whether no matter which way you look at it or not, they put the money into it, so they want to make sure that they keep to own their IP no matter what. So,
now, insofar as the secret world of all things, what was the appeal of that particular world to you? Were you already a longtime player of the MMO, whether it be the original or Legends, or was there a different route?
I had played it. I wouldn't say I played it extensively. My wife has played it extensively. That's where a lot of the love comes from, because I knew my wife loved it a lot, and so I knew that she would be interested in it if I did it. Yeah. She major fan. She has another word for it that I won't say. It's not PG-13.
I'm not PG-13.
No, I am when I talk though. My public statements will stay PG-13 if possible. She's a major fan. She's got at least 3 characters submitted to level 50 or more. She's in the background going more. So she's but I love the atmosphere, especially on Kingsmouth. It caught my interest with the feeling, the environment. When you played the game, it had a certain feeling that I hadn't gotten in any other video game really, and so I enjoyed that idea. And then I knew that my wife loved the story a lot. I mean, I love the story too, but my wife knows the story. I like the idea of the story. Do you know what I mean? She can quote lore. I can tell you how it makes me feel. Because that's how I play all video games. It's not for or better or worse for Secret World. It's how I play video games. Like, just enjoy it when I'm in it, and then I don't worry about the lore too much afterwards. That's why part of what took me longer to get the thing done was I made sure I hired people like Josh Deitch, who has written the buzzing, and people who would put the time into researching the lore and put it together the right way.
Yeah, I can certainly get that. And obviously, since it operates on archetypes, that's easy to transfer over to tabletop games. Were there, aside from some of the more obvious group content kind of things, was there anything in particular that you remember you guys wanting to put in from the MMO that just didn't quite fit the way you wanted it to?
I mean, it wasn't that there was things we couldn't get in. It was maybe things that we thought wouldn't. I guess it's things that don't translate. Like every single power and ability that the character has is not necessary for a tabletop from a video game. A video game does that for power leveling and control. The tabletop is, since it's automatically a shared experience, although people do solo gaming, but generally speaking, not the case for a game like this as a rule. But there are exceptions, of course. But in that, you can't sit there and say, okay, there's 22 different abilities. We need to give that all to one character. That would actually make the game cumbersome. It wouldn't be fun to play. So,
especially with something like something like Savage Worlds, where you're not really expected to have a lengthy ability list unless you're doing things like superpowers or I was gonna say magic in some cases, but that's up in the air. But definitely with supers.
Well, the thing about Savage Worlds specifically is it can translate a lot of things without needing as many things to make it do the same thing.
Yeah.
You want to translate the feeling, not the exact number crunch. You're going to go crazy trying to make. If you really want to play exactly like the video game, then your best choice is to play the video game, because that's a very specific way of playing that does not automatically or rarely can I think of a way that would translate to pen and paper. I'm sure it's possible, but would not necessarily be fun.
Yeah. And depending on the game in question, it can be done. But with MMOs or MMO adjacent games, it's going to be tricky just by the nature of the kind of games you're dealing with. Plus, as you're no doubt aware, in the early days, Savage Worlds had the tagline of "Fast, Furious, Fun," and
right.
Even to this day, it always has had more of a pulp leaning than anything else. it's always leaned a bit pulpy, regardless of when you do it. Like,
That's the aim, is to always keep it to be like that kind of fast action. Average combat. If I run Savage Worlds, if it goes more than 3 to 4 rounds, that's a really long combat, and that's done in usually 30 minutes.
mm-hmm.
And that's if you're really digging in with a number of people and you're getting up there. It usually goes pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So you're not spending hours running missions or running a combat.
Mm-hmm. But when it comes to now, obviously a big part of it is edges, and going back onto this whole thing of ideas that may have gotten refined or evolved out of with time. Were there any edges that had to be reworked a few times, or ones that just weren't going to fit?
I don't think anything that wasn't going to fit. It was finding the right way to. I mean, the biggest thing I think is when we made the conduits, which did work. It was finding the right way to make it work, and that was the tricky one, because I wasn't really satisfied with our initial concept of it. It's just going to be like you get powers for your archetype. I was like, that doesn't really reflect the game enough. I mean, it'll work, but I wanted something that reflected, in some sense, the game. And the conduits allowed to be like, the way those powers focus through the weapons was a much simpler way in the end to do it, that really, I think, worked out to reflect enough of the video game, but not be the video game. Like, hey, here's a card if you want to use that option, or you can just write it on your character sheet. Here's your power. Switch your weapon. Here's your powers. It was actually pretty simple once we figured it out. That and the lack of death mechanic
Mm-hmm.
was the other big challenge to translate in a way that Funcom was okay with, that suited the way Funcom wanted it reflected. That was the one thing that they kind of really had some feedback on. They gave us for that, to achieve that, to match up a certain way that was fundamental to the setting.
Yeah. I remember hearing a story a long time ago when Timothy Zahn was writing the Thrawn trilogy for Star Wars, and Lucas Books had sent him copies of a bunch of the old Star Wars D6 materials.
Mm-hmm.
With Funcom, when you guys started the project, did they end up sending you any research material or anything like that?
No, they didn't have any research material for us. They were kind of to share quite a bit of their art, which helped us, bring us the ability to get the first book done. And so that sped things up a bit. But no, there wasn't anything they gave us per se. They did give us some. I take that back. After I got going for a while, they found some material to share with me. But the bulk of it was us, digging through the wikis and talking to the other experienced players, and kind of and distilling that information that was out there and deciding what we really felt fit. And of course, we ended up, tweaking the story slightly. Some like it, some don't like it. I mean, we wanted to move the story ahead, because otherwise we're stuck with trying to replay the video game in an RPG, which is not what we want to do. Your story becomes very much just replay everything exactly as it happened in the RPG over and over again.
Yeah.
In the video game.
And I suppose that brings us to the first expansion that you're currently crowdfunding, which at this time is about, I'd say three-quarters of the way of there, if not 80% of the way there.
It's at 77%.
So I was,
because I watch it all the time.
I was close then. So with that in mind, when it comes to the Secret World North America expansion, obviously, I think you had said this on the Discord, that the plan is to do a series of expansions that are going to be focused on the different factions in the different regions. So, of the three major ones, Illuminati, Templars, and the Dragon, what made you guys want to go with Illuminati for the first one?
Well, because North America / Illuminati is closer to home, i.e., a little easier to figure out some stuff just based on what cities would be interesting. It's a little more into the easier, relatively speaking, easier. Europe is going to be something like I've never lived in Europe. I've never visited Europe. Just like any game writer, you can research stuff, put together. But there was, what's interesting in America for a city. I mean, hey, I like this one. I know some myths and so forth from stuff in my own country, and of course, then we wanted to expand to Canada, Mexico as well. But I mean, North America as a base. America, we had a good chunk to start with. And so, we want to go from there. But the further we get, like when we get to the dragon in Asia, there's gonna be a lot more research to, understanding the culture and not get it wrong. And that requires more time and a little more effort to do it the right way. So we want to make sure when we get there, we're ready to do it.
Yeah. Now, on the Kickstarter page, it talks about 3 cities that are brought up as new cities: Mexico City, Tampa, and Vancouver. Are those the 3 you're going to be focusing on, or are there other cities that are going to get some attention in the book?
So there are at least 7 cities actually in the book. That's just, I didn't want to put everything on. There's too much to put on a page. So that kind of showed a little bit of a spread of locations. And so yeah, there's actually 7 cities, and might be a few more. We'll just see where page count ends up in the end. That's really what it comes. We put ourselves a soft cap of 150 pages. Plus or minus, you get plus or minus about 10% on that, depending which way things go. And then of course, that's not kind of the pages for the character art being done by people. That should take 3 or 4 pages in the back too. So.
Oh yeah, I can get that. And that also brings us into the new archetypes. But I'd like to go over the 3 ones you put up on the page and kind of get a feel for where you want their, if not their play style, but their play direction to lean into. Starting with the Mystic, what would separate the Mystic from other types of caster-like archetypes?
So the one thing all 3 will have in common is they're human. They're not immortal. They can die. Whereas playing a bee, you can always come back. So it's going to change the way people want to play that game a little bit. You now have a little bit more risk for your character. You're out, you're gone, you're dead if something theoretically could happen. But then the Mystic is going to be we're still. I got 2 ways we're kind of really going to finalize once we get here. But it's definitely, the Mystic is not a combat oriented character. It's more your dealing with spirits or healing, a little bit that direction. So knowledge, healing, maybe consorting with some spirits for stuff, but not communing with the energy, kind of thing. That kind of feeling that people have. The exact details, we got to outline a couple things we want to do, but we'll really refine it when we get ready to really get down to the right, and of course see what gets approved.
Yeah,
because we have the basic approval, but we gotta get final approval for everything too.
Yeah, I can certainly get that. Now, what about the Boston Witch?
So that is a character where the Boston Witch is interesting because it will serve the Boston Witches. The Boston Witches will both be a faction, not like equivalent to the big 3, but it will be a different faction group you could be a part of to play, to give you some different way to play the game. Different goals, not necessarily tied to the main conspiracies itself, but it's also an archetype. So you're gonna have, and that's going to be ritual magic and or maybe some direct abilities to affect other people. And we have some ideas that I just don't want to say yet, because until we sit down and really do the crunch and make sure it works, because you think it'll work. Now we got to make sure not only does it work for Savage Worlds, it also has to work in 5e. And so it's but ritual magic and or the ability to maybe empower the party a little bit. So that's kind of like, like, hey, can I give you a potion or something? Things like that are where we've really looked at it. And again, have an outline, but final will depend on making sure it actually works well when we put it together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And when it comes to the third one, which is the operative, what sort of approach or what sort of play style is that going to be going into?
So that's the one that I actually have written and done for Savage Worlds already. Because number one, Savage Worlds is easy to work up first as a preliminary because it's not the same balancing we have to do with the 5e class.
Mm-hmm.
But we have it as more of a master manipulator. So you need information, you need people to do things, you need to get things. That's your definitely your charismatic character.
Diplomancer.
So diplomancer?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually a cool term. I never heard that before. But yeah, something like that, yes. No magic, purely skill.
Yeah.
So
I think there's the obvious question that'd be asked, like, what would you can and this was kind of already answered, but what would, in the case of the operative, what would separate them from, say, the trickster? I know you brought up the whole thing with the bee, but beyond that.
Well, I mean, primarily the way they can manipulate people through organizations and have that ability without magic, and or sometimes it's a matter of being able to play a different style. It's so that you can play and not be magic or mystic or whatever. But yeah, there's no spell components, what have you, and I don't mean that in the term spell components, but like no component of spell casting involved. So it is more just be able to really talk people into doing things and or get things when you need them.
Mm-hmm. And is it? I know with the core Savage Worlds, not the core Savage World, but the core Secret World. The problem when you have two titles both with world in them, they end up getting cross-wired. I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one who's made that mistake.
Savage World, Secret World, the short version is Sawo Siwo.
I know that these days the latest edition of Savage Worlds is called Suede, which I both like and dislike. But the Secret World core book already had a handful of new edges. We already talked about some of them when it came to the whole thing with conduits. But will there be some North America exclusive edges, for instance?
Yeah, I mean, in order to build an archetype in Savage Worlds, you generally speaking are going to have some kind of edges needed to make them, why are they different or what's unique about them. So especially, for example, with the operative, we already wrote new edges specifically around that manipulation of people and things are already created for them. And we did take a little bit of what we did with Starbreaker, where we did professions, which is a block of some skills and a package of slightly more powerful edges. Because the world is, bees and everything, if you're going to play these characters who don't have magic powers, we at least want to balance them out a little stat-wise, so at least they're comparable to play in the world. Yeah. So when you play these characters, you get a professional. If you're not an arcane background or a person with mystic powers, you're going to get a little bit of a boost the other way to help you fill out and work.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the more customizable aspects of Savage Worlds has always been the setting rules, to make it as lethal or as high-powered as the table wants it to be. And you have that with the core book, with applying the rules Born a Hero, Conviction, and more skill points, as well as the new stuff with the Buzzing and Destiny. When it comes to playing the new archetypes, are there any setting rules that are going to be added to that, or are those the main ones still?
I hadn't really considered needing any necessarily. But when we sit down and look at the final stuff, the final package, sometimes we might go, what the setting really needs, if you're going to play it this way, is X, Y, Z. So it could be something like, playing the gritty damage to make it a little more scary. Chances of dying a little bit higher if you want to add that in there.
Mm-hmm.
I think the more likely thing for us to do is point out what setting rules from the horror companion might, because that wasn't really done or at least wasn't when we were writing as much, wasn't really available for us to consider at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So for the first book, so we might say, hey, here's some hints of things that can really, if you want to take the game a little more this direction, we'll talk about some existing ones that might,
Mm-hmm.
people might enjoy using.
Yeah, and I'm guessing based on that, you'd look at the horror companion and go what stuff might fit and what stuff wouldn't, but not have it that the horror companion is a necessary requirement in the same way some games have an alternative if you don't want to use, say, the sewer power companion for their power system.
Right. What we want to do is just give suggestions, say there are other resources out here that can help you. And if you're going to run a lot of this game, this might be something you will enjoy using. Here's where you can find it. And since it's already written for it and everything, it would make sense to reference it since it is horror and was very much helpful to doing that.
Mm-hmm. I can certainly get that. Now, with that in mind, were there, when it comes to writing out essentially two systems in one project, was it a case where it was easy to do because you had done one and then the other, or was it an issue with trying to juggle both at once at any point?
I mean, are you talking about the first book or this book?
Just in general, just writing for two rule sets in the same line.
Well, so when we did the 5e version, the first book, obviously we didn't know if we would be able to do a second system or not. We were kind of we told people we wanted to, but we didn't say for sure if we would or what system would be too often because we didn't know where we'd get to be. Doing the Savage Worlds, it's very easy to convert something to Savage Worlds.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's tries to be a universal system. It does pretty good overall in fitting that. It's very flexible. It's easy to put something into that gives you that feeling of something that's similar to what the other system might have or story might have.
Mm-hmm.
So with the writing already done for the first book, converting it was much easier because we just had to focus on how do we mechanically reflect this game. And we also didn't try and force ourselves to be like, well, it's not like the D&D rule set. We said, no, what we need to do is make something that works in this system that represents the game. It doesn't necessarily have to copy the D&D system. So we're pretty free that way. Now, when we're doing two at the same time, it can tend to be a little more daunting because now we have to say whatever we design in one has to go into the other.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to keep that in mind.
And speaking of that, one of the first stretch goals that was teased was about talismans. And when it comes to creating those sorts of things, obviously this is going to be trickier in the 5e version, but with Savage Worlds, would you be treating those as a specialized type of equipment or something along those lines?
So that we're still, again, there's a couple things we have ideas for that we're really sure that will work, but we don't want to like, this is what we're doing,
Mm-hmm.
But largely it would be easiest to do similar to what I did in Starbreaker and simply take a power, ability, whatever, and it's in that item. And that could be an edge or a power, and you say this item does this. And it's that simple. It's really not that hard. It's just whether we're going to let, how many are we going to let your character have? What do we feel balances the game or not? What limits do we want to put on that so someone doesn't have 20 of them?
Mm-hmm.
There is a certain, I've got 22 different talismans. Well, your sheet's also 5 pages long with abilities and powers. You got to keep that in mind. The easiest way to do that's to tie getting a talisman or something like that to like an edge. So you can, you get an edge, you can have 2. You get another edge, you can have 2 more.
Mm-hmm.
There's ways to do limits, but we're still reviewing the final push on that. So that's not too hard to do for Savage Worlds, and D&D's always had magic items, so that's in a very specific item object type way. So not that hard on that subject.
Yeah, it's when you try and make magic item creation systems, that's when things get hard.
Yeah, fortunately, they did do the fantasy companion to give us some ideas for Savage Worlds, and of course, D&D has whole setups and rules for doing that already. And so I don't think that's necessarily hard. Daryl does most of my. I tell Daryl, said, "Here's the idea I want. Here's the things I think will work," and then he says, "Well, what about this and that?" And he kind of puts it together in a way that works for me. So Daryl's both writer and mechanical guy who helps me out a lot. He's super appreciated as part of the team.
Mm-hmm.
Daryl Hardy.
Yeah, I can get that. Now, one of the other things that's going to be added in is obviously there's the mission pack as shown on the Kickstarter, but also I guess an adventure path. Would you consider following the trail to be an adventure path, or something else?
In Savage Worlds, we call it a plot point campaign. So I haven't played a lot of Pathfinder. So adventure path, yeah, it's that same thing. It's an interconnected adventure that's all related.
Yeah, and I'm using adventure path as a catch-all, essentially.
Yeah, so D&D usually just calls them like a campaign.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever you buy that book that has the adventure in it. Savage Worlds calls a series of interconnected adventures usually a plot point campaign. Mm-hmm. Same thing in the end. It's a set of adventures that are together, and it's going to be 3, and it's really going to. The idea is to cover what caused the break in reality to be slightly different from the timeline in the video game.
Yeah,
and we're going to torture you by making it happen over every book that comes out before you'll see the end. So it's going to be a while.
And with that in mind, when it comes to the ranking setup, do you plan on having those adventures take place within the same suggested rank, or is it going to be across the ranks within Savage Worlds?
So if you're talking about like when someone quote unquote levels up their character in Savage Worlds, novice, seasoned, etc. So typically something like that, because we're gonna, obviously have to, because we are choosing to do it over, each book. I think the idea is to write these 3 to progress at a certain rate that would. I would think by the time you're done with the first 3, I mean these 3, you would probably be at least seasoned at some point. So yeah, it's not going to just be for one rank. And if you start off with Stoneward Bound, you run these 3 adventures, you run Contagion, you run the 12 adventures in the mission pack, you're likely to be a much higher rank depending on how fast the GM wants to advance you. So maybe we get lucky and we can advance the story and write the rest of the story sooner, so we don't have to make people wait as long. But part of being a small company is having to pay for things as we go, kind of thing, till we get to maybe that level where we generate a lot, till we start making so much money I can retire from my day job.
Oh yeah. And when it comes to the mini adventures, Savage World is compact enough that you can do a whole adventure right up in a single page, and plenty of people have done it. With the mission pack, is that something that's going to be carried over? Like the mission pack for Savage Worlds is going to be pretty light on the page count?
Yes, that's exactly the intention. There's 1 or 2, if I believe, depending on how we can fit them, if there's any art in them or not, because you usually don't put a lot of art in what we call a one sheet. Because literally it's one sheet of paper, both sides you use. I think there was 1 or 2 that, depending the way we format it, might go slightly over a page. I think that's because the writer included stats that were already in the core book, and since in order to play you'll have to have the core book, we might just say, hey, see the book, and that will fix that problem.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're not going to take a lot of pages. They should be, if you count front and back, it's 24 pages or 12 sheets overall.
And given the nature of this thing, there's going to be some people who are coming into it who are already familiar with the MMO, and some people who aren't. when it comes to the playtesting that you've done, what's been your insight regarding people who've come into this who didn't either only had tangential understanding of the MMO or were complete newcomers to Secret World as a whole?
I think the great thing about newcomers is they don't have any preconceived notions, so whatever's in the book they enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, they just play the game and they enjoy it. They like the idea of it. I think what really comes down to is the type of adventure running can really skew their view of what the world is. Like, you could play the Secret World as cryptid hunters and make that your focus in the role playing if you want to. That's what you could do most of the time. You can deal with grand conspiracies across the world, or you can deal with a conspiracy in your hometown. You can really focus on the end of the world horror type concept to it, or you can just focus on stopping that monster in that town kind of thing, which the one sheets largely do quite a bit of that, because they're meant to be something you can play one off and be done with it, not worry too much about long-term effects, for example. And the plot point campaign is going to focus more on the overall world stuff, and that's on purpose to get people. Not every GM wants to worry about the end of the world.
Yeah,
that type of concept. Sometimes you just want to sit down and play a game, have fun, and not worry about some of that stuff. So we're trying to balance out the options a bit.
And if I'm being honest, I wouldn't be surprised if some people end up using, say, North America to do a Men in Black and all but name kind of thing.
I mean, it wouldn't be hard, and what I like to say is, once you own the book, once you've bought that book and set it down on your table, there is no wrong way for you to play it as long as you and your group are having fun. So if that's the way they want to approach it, that's fine. That's awesome, because you're having fun. I'm just glad you wanted to give us a chance to put that book in your hands, or that PDF in your tablet, or whatever, however you play.
Yeah, I can certainly get that. I call that the "I'm not your dad" philosophy. Yeah.
If you're going to ask me, for example, when I wrote Starbreaker, I've had a lot of people ask me, well, how would you run it? I said, well, I can tell you how I'd run it. If that's how you want to run it, that's fine. Especially when I played, there's guys who've been running the game at a convention a couple times, and I said, let me sit in. I want to play too, so I can play the world I created. And they're like, they get nervous. That I'm not going to interrupt you when you run. It's your game. And I enjoyed it. And I was like, I thought to myself, I would have done it that way, but that's cool.
Yeah, which certainly makes sense. Now, with that in mind, when it comes to the material present, what are you shooting for as far as the page count for North America?
Well, like we spoke about earlier, it's a soft cap of 150. It could be a little less, could be a little more. It's not going to be a lot less, and it's not going to be a lot more. It's just that's sort of the mid-range we're looking for. If we feel there's some really important stuff, and it could balloon up a little bit, but you can't let it balloon out of control, because it becomes impossible to finish the project cost-wise. And I got to pay the writers. For some reason, they want money. Editor, layout, art, so on. So you have to stay within that range, whether you like it or not. So the good news is that becomes potential future material too. So.
Oh yeah. And as far as the current Kickstarter, as we mentioned, is about 77% funded.
78 now, while we're talking.
See? Meme magic is real. But what would you be shooting for as far as a release window? Not a hard date, per se, but a ballpark. Kind of like that soft number you mentioned before with the page count.
The release window I gave myself is, I believe, March of next year. Because by the time we can't, I don't start a project like this until I have the money. We won't get the money from Kickstarter until March, because, about 2 weeks after the Kickstarter ends, we get the money. So sometime in March, we get the money. Now, if we funded by tomorrow, I would start writing, because I know we're going to have the money. So I basically give myself about a year. And I plan to have it done sooner than that. But like the 5e book, we had a lot of personal issues for some of the staff had some things going on that really delayed us, which is why we want to give ourselves a year, because we really try not to overshoot that. We don't want to, but if someone's sick or someone had to quit doing something and go on to something else because whatever reason, that can. We're a small company. We don't have a huge staff, so we have to make things work. But we've put some great people in place that are really pretty. Daryl's a fantastic writer. Alita's doing our layout for us. Josh is just right on the money for reviewing stuff and helping write stuff. My wife has already pre-researched all our cryptids types things that we want to use in here for me. So we are ready to go. I mean, we got a couple pieces of art done already, got an outline, kind of keep talking back and forth what we want to do with it. So in a perfect world, I'd love to have it done in less than 6 months, but I'm not going to say it's going to be done in that time and then we miss it, because that's the way to get people upset for sure.
Yeah, we've seen plenty of those across crowdfunds over the last decade. But I will certainly be looking forward to seeing how North America shapes up. But with that said, I do want to sincerely thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come all the way to my monastery and enjoy the madness that happens around here. And anytime you see fit to return, the door is always open. As I often say around here, drinking is not mandatory, but it is encouraged.
Well, and just before I go, remind everyone that the first book is available, so if they really want to go check it out now, PDF's only $20 if you want to take a dive into it for the Savage Worlds version.
And of course, a sincere thanks goes out to everyone who took the time out of their schedule to come onto the show and enjoy the madness. And there'll be plenty more where that came from, as there always is here, on the open bar of the internet. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra. I am your gaming monk. Stay fucking frosty, everybody.
Also